Are public sector workers too fragile? It's time now for the head-to-head. Shocking new analysis by The Telegraph has found that public sector workers are 3 times more likely to take mental health days off than those in the private sector. So according to the Office for National Statistics, the 2022 18.5 million days were lost because of mental health issues, a rise of more than 2 million compared to 2020. It was shocking, isn't it? Of the private sector workers taking sick leave, 7% cited mental health reasons compared to 13% in the public sector. The crisis is especially bad in the NHS, with staff taking 46.5% more mental health sick leave in 2024 than they did before the pandemic. In fact, just days ago, thousands of civil servants at the Land Registry voted to stage a walkout over new requirements to work from the office for 60% of the week. Imagine that, eh? It's also emerged that civil servants were awarded high street shopping vouchers worth £30 million as bonuses for good performance. That's double the amount awarded 2 years ago. Tonight I am asking, are civil servants too fragile? Well, joining me now is, of course, the former Tory MP, Neil Parish, and the former civil servant, Pablo O'Hana. Neil, I'll bring you in first, mate. Are civil servants just mentally fragile and, frankly, on the take?
Patrick, good evening. I don't think they're necessarily too fragile, but I think they have spent too much time during COVID away and not coming in and mixing. I think some of them perhaps, all of us can be introspective at times, and I think this has not done their mental state any good. I also think a lot of private workers work for smaller companies, and there is a bit more of a family atmosphere. I think some of it is the bureaucracy of the NHS in particular. I think some of it can be down to perhaps some of the management styles as well. So it's a combination of all those things. And I think sometimes perhaps the public sector worker chooses the public sector because they want a sort of different style of life. They don't want so much.
But what is that style of life, though? Work from home, don't bother turning up. Pablo, it's nice to see former civil servant. Your mental health is obviously fine tonight, so thank you for turning up. But, I mean, come on. Are people using it as an excuse?
Well, I think firstly we need to stop demonising the public sector like it's an us versus them thing, because we need a strong public and private sector. But it is the public sector that is the backbone of our United Kingdom. These are the people who go out on the front line for below average pay. They run into fires. They put themselves in dangerous situations. They clean our streets.
Oh, no, they don't.
And they work 24/7 to make us better. Well, yeah, but we're incredibly lucky to have the public sector that we do. And that's everything from, as you say, HMRC, but it's also MI5. They keep us safe here at home and abroad. We have the greatest health service in the world. And I think we need to be careful that we don't just reduce them to statistics and figures.
Pablo, I'm going to stick with you. Why is it that they're almost 3 times as likely to take a day off for their mental health?
Because they're incredibly overworked. I mean, the NHS is buckling under the pressure like never before, not just from patient demand, but staff are not getting the support that they need. And they've had, obviously, we know that there have been mental health services being cut, and these people are on the front line. You think about the pandemic, they carried us through the NHS. The NHS carried us through this pandemic. We had the greatest rollout of vaccines anywhere in the world, precisely because of the NHS.
And we had a church service for the NHS, and that was magnificent. But Neil, just to Pablo's
we were
point there,
vaccinating people at an extraordinary number, and to turn our back on them now is
we're not turning our back on them, Pablo. I'm wondering, whether or not we should ask them to turn up to work a little bit more. Neil, what's your view on that?
I do think public sector workers go well beyond the NHS. A lot of the public sector workers are administration staff. I worked in Parliament all through the pandemic. Most of those staff stayed away far too long, in my view. And so this is where a lot of the problems occurring as well. So, we all accept there's a lot of very good public sector workers out there, but they should not be taking as much time off. So either there's a problem with the workers themselves, or it's the way that the system is there. And I agree with Pablo. There's a lot of pressure on people, but don't believe there's no pressure in the private sector either. I run my own farm. You've got to get up, feed those animals, do it all, and nobody else is there to do it because you've got to go and do it. So I think sometimes we've got to sort of put everything into perspective, and I think people do need to, perhaps, dare I say it, put a little bit more pressure sometimes on themselves in order to get themselves to work, because I think...
But you don't have to. You don't have to if you just paid by the taxpayer. That's the thing. Pablo, 30 million quid in shopping vouchers to say well done to people in the public sector. With respect, for what, mate? Oh, you have to buy your own shopping. I have to buy my own shopping. Neil buys his own shopping. I mean, what are they? We all work hard. Brilliant, fantastic. Go to Waitrose, have it on the taxpayer.
Well, the only time that I ever knew of that in the civil service was when we dealt with really, really pressured situations. There were two situations that I dealt with which were really stressful. One of them was the 2017 Westminster attack, where I was in the department responsible for helping getting out the Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May. And then the second was when Monarch Airlines went bust, and it sparked the largest repatriation of Britons across the world in peacetime history. And they were two very, very stressful times in which we were working around the clock, literally 24/7, to get both those situations resolved. Okay, so, you know, a £10 M&S voucher is not going to, you know, solve all our problems. But I do think there is an element that we need to thank people for working in these places, because they are thankless tasks. Yes, they're paid, but honestly, the pay is not great.
It's your job, mate.
It doesn't compare against the private sector.
Thank you. No, seriously, well done, genuinely. I'm not trying to be unkind. Brilliant, well done, genuinely. A job well done. But it is your job, mate. Like, what was it? Mario Balotelli said, you know, the postman doesn't get a round of applause every time he delivers a letter, does he?
No, but there are some jobs that are, by definition, more stressful, more pressured, and a lot of those are in the public sector because they have their departments cut, they are working longer hours for much worse pay. Public sector pay is not on a par with private sector. It just isn't. People go into the public sector because they really believe in what they do, especially...
Neil, is that true? Go on, Neil, is that true? Is public sector pay worse, really, than private sector?
No, I think there's a lot of private sector workers there that are not, you know, a lot of them can be on minimum wage and some on higher wages, but they do actually have to work hard also. They do have to accept the pressure. And I think when it's a smaller company, perhaps the management can also see when those workers are more under pressure. So I think the whole thing, the public sector is too large, and it is not run efficiently. And I also think, you know, especially if you are either run your own business or you're in work for a small business, you also have to go in because you know everything's got to be dealt with. Because not only people have to be dealt with, Pablo, so do animals, so do everything else in this world, and we've got to get out there and do it. And I think sometimes it'd be better if people actually sort of perhaps didn't quite look so much into themselves and actually got on with the job. I know it sounds a bit old-fashioned, it sounds a bit tough, but I think sometimes they would be better. And if they actually went into work more and didn't work from home and isolated, I think they would feel better mentally as well.
Well, I mean, there's the pension issue as well, isn't there? Go on, Pablo. Come back to that. With respect, mate, when you were a civil servant, I mean, what kind of pension were you on?
My pension wasn't really that great, to be honest. There is an idea when you go into the civil service, you're going to get this like incredible pension. I'm not sure. I mean, I think historically that perhaps was the case. By the time I arrived in 2017, that really wasn't the case. The pension is on a par with everybody else. You put in, the government match, well, you know, your employer matches it. It's just the same as everybody else.
What was it?
No. No, that's
I
not.
can't remember what it was. I can't remember what it was.
Okay.
But the pension is not the point. Like, people go into the public sector because they believe in what they do. So do people in the private sector. But there are unique pressures on the public sector, including, of course, nearly a decade of cuts from the Conservatives. So I do think that we need to face up to the reality that the public sector is under immense amount of stress that is just different to the private sector. It just is, and they are facing pressures that other places simply don't.
Okay.
I should be supporting them, not demonizing them, doing all those things about statistics. It's not fair.
I don't think it's just the public.
All right, guys, thank you very much. Former Tory MP Neil Parish and the former civil servant Pablo O'Hana. Happy New Year to both of you. Thank you very much. So who do you agree with? Are civil servants too fragile?